Hey there, this is Wayne Simmons. This is going to be a video rebuttal to Victor Pross's Anarchism, Competition, and Force. Victor Pross makes only 2 points worth rebutting, really, in his rambling presentation. He says anarchists are in essential agreement, whether they know it or not, with objectivists on what is force, and he also says that he believes in opening up protection of individual rights, arbitration disputes, judgment of wrongdoing to anyone or any person or persons who would like to set up that service. Oh, wouldn't that be a beautiful world? Anyway, okay, so we have this first easy argument to rebut is the argument that objectivists and anarchists are essentially in agreement with what is force. This is completely nonsense. I would say just read the literature for yourself, right? How the anarchists. I'll take concrete examples. Victor doesn't provide any examples of who he's talking about in terms of anarchists are essential in agreement. Why not, Victor? Why don't you provide actual examples of who the hell you're talking about? Very disingenuous of you to actually make a statement, not provide any examples of who you're talking about. But you take the perspective of what. Let's look at the Middle East, and the war on jihadis, right? And the perspective on foreign policy and how you should deal with such threats. The anarchists don't have a coherent view. You take any how anarchists see rights. I mean, there's massive differences between David Friedman and Milton and Murray Rothbard. Man, you got to do your homework. I've spent time, as full disclosure, I was involved in setting up the ISO conference in 2000. So I spent time with libertarians and anarchists. And so I not only have I read the literature, but I've spent time discussing such wild, ridiculous ideas with anarchists like their Somalia Free State project, trying to graft on their utopian ideals on a mystical backwards society like that. I mean, they just kooky stuff. There's Jen Hellfield was debating David Friedman. I'd suggest you watch the video. It's actually very germane to Victor, what Victor says about open competition for individual rights. Let's take that to its logical conclusion and use an example. Now, sure, you could probably, in a world where you went to your competition, you went to a dispute resolution organization, and your dispute resolution organization had, we had an arbitration court to go to. So you say you had a society like that, and it was like small trivial issues, right? And you went to your next door neighbor, and it was like a particular issue, very trivial. You could have maybe a dispute where 2 parties agree, and no one really needs to be involved in the process. Little minor things where you could have agreements between 2 people. Could be just petty issues. Fill in the blank in terms of what petty is. But most people wouldn't consider murder to be petty. Okay, so let's deal with murder, 1st degree murder or something. I mean, that's another thing. What would be 1st, 2nd, and 3rd degree, or manslaughter rather, 1st, 2nd manslaughter, or whatever, in in an anarchist society? How would this be clearly defined? Across all boundaries. But let me deal with my example. Suppose for the sake of this discussion, let's call him Bill, murders Jane. Jane's family decides to take, Jane's family's DRO is very meticulous, and they've made a great reputation to be able to find out who the murderer is, which is Bill, right? So they find Bill, they go, they bring Bill to court. Now, of course, Bill's DRO is going to be in Bill's favor, right? Bill's paying the money, right? And so they're going to get an arbitration court, a market court, to be in their favor, right? Jane's family, in memory of Jane, is going to want a court to bring him to justice, to see to it that he serves time, or something, right? Supposedly they come to an agreement. You could make up tons of scenarios. Could be that the family Bill has tons of money and says, look, would $1 million do it? Maybe he's been found. His DRO says, look, we'll buy her off, right? Buy off the family. Now the question is, if we live in that society and Bill's a murderer, maybe he's a nutcase. Do we have a right to know what the decisions are of those particular courts? I think we do. I think we have a right to know what the court decisions are, right? And this is a decision that has to be made for everybody. Everybody has to be aware of what, that Bill has been brought to justice. He's been guilty of murder. And, so in an anarchist system, there's no particular reason why they don't look at the scenario from this perspective of everybody else that's not paying the DRO, right? And that's very important. But you could see a scenario very reasonably, and if that DRO decides it's not going to provide that information, you could say, well, fine, they'll be called out, right, in a society. But there's lots of versions of law that could develop, within the culture. There would be, because it would be based on the desires. You say you're not a subjectivist, but you have to draw out the conclusions rationally by what words mean. In just understanding how competition really works. If I'm setting up a company, I want to steal a market share from somebody else, right? And so it stands to reason logically that there's going to be different definitions of what justice is. Even our society today, we have different definitions people consider what justice is, and there's social justice. There's advocate social justice, we could jump out of the scenario of the classical liberal, but even the classical liberals or the anarchists, to point out, there's massive differences between David Friedman and Murray Rothbard, or Murray Rothbard and George H. Smith. I've given an example of that already. Victor, you are devoid of any actual examples, in terms of your own perspective, and it's where you falter, your argument falters. And so I envision a society where, yes, that Bill would be able to get away with murder, because his DRO could, pay hush money. If they wouldn't accept hush money, maybe it would get to a point where it's a civil war. But who's going to force that particular DRO to provide all that information to the whole public? These aren't just practical concerns, and you can't brush them aside like they're only practical concerns. Again, that's a moral practical dichotomy you have. If I'm living in a society, I want to know that I want to know publicly accessible decisions. I want publicly accessible decisions by courts, and I want to know that whoever's ever wielding force I know how they're going to wield it, when they're going to wield it, who they're going to wield it against. I have to know that information in a particular area. And the complexity of having all of these kinds of DROs and arbitration courts and stuff like that, it would just, it'd boggle the mind. And I'm just looking at how, things are. I'm just taking a logical position based on how we know what the market is like today. and then we're projecting it based on the concept of justice, the concept of right and wrong, and looking at how people do see it. And yeah, in a free society, it would be difficult to enact, individual rights and protection of life, liberty, and property, and that sort of thing. But it is insurmountable when you give when you give the incentive for others to set up shop in your particular area. It's unworkable and nihilistic, and you would have shot through the system would be balkanized society where people would only do business with those who know each other, and even in those circumstances, heated situations would erupt because people think they're right, and even if they delegate to a particular DRO, they're bound to want to violate that, because they're going to say, to hell with it, I signed that contract and I don't agree with you. And so there would be scenarios where they would want to go to another organization. So I think that I just suggest to people to really think through the arguments that Victor Prost makes and others make, and I think it's the danger in dealing in abstractions devoid of concrete examples, and not looking at how the world really works is a major mistake. I can look at the Canadian criminal code, and I can tell you where I find problems with that Canadian criminal code, because that's publicly accessible, and it's provided to me because that government is, we're all, that government represents us all. Period, full stop. You lose, pal. Looking forward to providing more content. Those who are subscribing to me, please, if you're seeing this video, subscribe, because I will have lots of videos in the future. Just got to just provide that content for you, and please subscribe, and look forward to providing more content in the future. Cheers. Take care. Bye.